Hello. So I am in a gallery called Baxter Street, which is in Manhattan. And the director was very kind to let me back in the space. It's not officially open again. But my show, Gray Matter, opened March 4th and was closed about a week later. So I thought instead of sharing my screen, I would actually share the exhibition with you guys. And Baxter Street is a very interesting gallery. It's located in Chinatown, and it's the most recent iteration of the New York Camera Club, which was a camera club. It has existed since 1884, so it's one of the oldest camera clubs in the world. And all the work that you're going to see, everything is made in the darkroom. They're all unique prints. And I wanted to just allow you to see the show and then come back and talk about it if there's time, and obviously during question and answer. So my husband is he's shooting the show, so I'm going to step away for a minute so you can see the work. And for me, one of my favorite things about this show was being able to include books that have inspired the work. So they have bookshelves, and you're invited to bring books that inspire you, books that help explain the work that you're doing. So in some ways, they become like your artist statements. The work that you're looking at in the space was made over a 5-year period. And the curator, Melanie Wilhide, was great. She very skillfully came into my studio and edited, making all this work kind of flow together. And then the person who hung it, Jesse Cesario, was very playful with the rhythm of the hanging, which I think helps or is reflected in the work too. So I thought he was very skillful in creating movement. And for me, I'm very interested in transforming the two-dimensional into the three-dimensional. And prior to this, 5 years ago, I was living in California, and I was a landscape photographer, but it was a very pared down landscape that was sky, earth, and horizon line. And once I moved to New York City, the horizon line started to disappear, and the work became very much about this sort of internal landscape. And then my interests in science and the occult started to enter the work. And all the work I've made since I've lived in New York has all been black and white. I haven't, and I've worked in color photography before. But I also work in other materials. But since I've been in New York, photography has really been my main material. So in this body of work, we're looking at least 4 different bodies. And within these bodies, different bodies of work, there are different techniques that I'm utilizing. Some of them quite old and traditional. For example, this print is a cliché bear print, which means I'm working with a piece of photographic paper in the darkroom. I'm using a piece of mylar that I've covered in Sumi ink, which I've then drawn circles in, and then I'm rotating this template in the darkroom to create this sense of circularity. And it's why also the center circle is not in fact a perfect circle, because it's relying on my own estimation. Because in the darkroom, you can't actually see what you've done until that piece of paper goes into the developer. And once it's in the developer, you aren't able to make any corrections. So there is this leap of faith and alchemy and magic that happens in the translation of sculpting time and light in the darkroom. This piece right here called Condense is made merely with the light from the enlarger and moving the paper around to construct this sculptural piece that feels hopefully like something that's sort of coming together and maybe falling apart at the same time. With these particular pieces, the series was called, or is called, Less Than a Second. And each exposure that's made, because each of these things each exposure is made independently, and I'm building upon the exposure that came before, again, not being able to see what's happening. And all of these exposures are 0.1 seconds. So when you're looking at the cumulative time in these prints, they actually are less than a second overall, their totality. And I think for me, I am far more excited by photography when I'm not using any sort of negative. I'm more excited by the environment, the chemical reaction that occurs, the use of illumination, the way that even 0.1 seconds of time actually is this measurable thing that you can feel and see. Whereas in my life outside of the darkroom, that's much harder, obviously, to experience. With this particular body of work, the line that you see is actually caused by creasing the paper. And just creasing the paper, these cracks became black and created this sort of tension around the circles. And for me, these function as both something very small, like you're looking inside the eye, to something much larger, like some sort of orbit that is out of whack. The pieces, this piece right here is called Logos, and it's part of a wider series. This piece is called, the series is called Logos. The piece itself is called Divide. And then this piece is, we call this paper mural paper because it's large piece of photographic paper. And this was a series called Form Worms. And I was interested in the way, this idea of form and formlessness, things coming together again and falling apart, and capturing that kind of tension of the two. And this piece is called Radiate. The thing that's a little bit tricky about this work in general is you're looking at silver and paper when you're standing in front of it. And so to see a facsimile of it often denies the impact of the material itself, because the material of this photographic paper has so much integrity. It's built on this chemical reaction and or for this chemical reaction. So anyway, it's sometimes the disappointment for me in having to show it in another way, as opposed to somebody looking directly at the prints themselves. So yeah, I guess it's Q&A time. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Or
my name is Nisha, and there were a couple things that I I like a lot of the things about your work, but a couple things that really struck me was that I am very interested in the concept just of time, and you've actually, in a sense, recorded time, but because it's an artwork, and especially after hearing you and what your heart and sensibilities are, it's inviting to the viewer so that it becomes timeless and continuing on some kind of a continuum of time. So it's not static. It's not like a static recording of time. So I really love that. The other thing about your process that I found so interesting is that it reminds me a lot of raku pottery. You know, that it's happy moment, happy accident. You have no you have an idea of where your body and your mind and your spirit are flowing in space, but it's not, again, it's not some kind of a static conceptualization of things. So I'm very moved by your things. Thank you.
And it's interesting because I haven't had a dark room during this pandemic, and I've been working with porcelain. So I like so much that you talked about raku, and yes, thank you. That was really, really lovely. I appreciate it.
This is Dorothy. I'm in Southwest France. So I'm very curious. I mean, it's very interesting. I did a lot of black and white darkworm, not like this, not sort of, it's almost like monotype, but you can't see what you're doing. So it's really interesting. But I wanted you to address the scale differences. You know, some pieces are big, some are small.
That's a great point. And it's interesting because I feel like the scale of things happens in response to what I was doing before, and also the way that I want the body to relate to the piece itself. So for example, these prints here are 2024, which I'm also dealing with the scale of photographic paper in general. So these are pre-cut pieces. This paper, this print condensed is actually on roll paper, but sometimes I'm confined by the processing sinks that I'm in. So for example, with the form worms, I had to, instead of using trays in a darkroom, I had to literally use the stainless steel sink to process them. So sometimes the size is dependent on my tools. Sometimes the size is dependent on the impact that I want the pieces to have. And I will try them in different sizes, or I'll try the techniques in different sizes, because I can never necessarily repeat what I did, and just sort of see what resonates. So some pieces feel like they function. I mean, I could see this piece larger, truly. But some of them, for example, these pieces from Less Than a Second, I feel like I want them to be this kind of, I don't even know, doll size. And also the framing of them, because the paper itself and the image becomes sculptural, I didn't overmat because I wanted you to feel the kind of curling and the almost eggshell quality that the photographic fiber-based paper has on its own. Because it does, when you see the sheen, it almost feels like it's eggshell. So thank you, everybody. That was very wonderful to share this show, and helpful because it was only up for a week. So it's nice to get comments and feedback, and I'm very grateful. So thank you, and good luck to everybody. Bye.